Ryan and Steve. It's been a great partnership. And to welcome Hector and Rachel. Greenwich has a special delegation. We work together, and I look out and I see Livy Florin, who was one of my mentors up there in Hartford. So lots of work to do, but we work together. I grew up here in town, served on way too many boards and committees and commissions to list here, but a lot in the athletic realm over in my first half of my life. 11 years in Hartford as a state representative, serving my second term now. And the United Way really is an organization that has helped me. I know David reached out to me when I first got elected, and we've talked a few times, quite a few times since then. And the statistics that Dave would give me helped present our case in Hartford. Very, very, very important because sometimes they get a skewed view of Greenwich and Fairfield County, and it's quite diverse, as we all know. And when Lauren and I were sworn in a few years ago, we were met with a pandemic, and I remember getting a call from David because he said, "You're big on these public-private partnerships. I got one for you." And we went out to the BET. We asked for $100,000 for money to make sure that kids didn't go hungry because everybody had lost their jobs, they were home, and a lot of kids were on free and reduced lunch. We took a lot of heat for that, but they raised, I don't know, $800,000 on top of our $100,000, and it was very, very successful, and it was the right thing to do, and I salute the United Way and the town for stepping up. So thank you, and I look forward to this forum.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you to the Greenwich United Way for hosting this event and for inviting me to participate this morning. I'm the representative-elect for the 149th District, which, as Kim said, covers parts of Greenwich and North Stamford. I'm the parent of 4 young women, and I'm a 20-year resident of the district and have been active and involved in the community since we moved here, serving on the Parkway PTA Board, the Kids in Crisis Audubon, and most recently I served on the Greenwich RTM in District 10 for 2 terms. I don't know my committee assignments yet, and I'm looking forward to hearing them soon, and to working with the Greenwich delegation in Hartford, and I'm also excited to be here to listen and learn to the needs of the town of Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those introductions. Our first question involves something that we talk about all the time, inflation, right? We know that in Greenwich, the wealth gap continues to expand. So in these inflationary times, what is the work that you are doing to help ensure that Connecticut's middle and low-income families are able to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets? Let's start with you, Ms. Fiorello.
Thank you. Sorry, I realized I don't have my microphone on. Okay, that's better. This is a really great question. It is sort of the essence of what is the proper role of government. So in my last 2 years in Hartford, I was always trying to ensure that our state government stayed in its proper lane, which is to abide by our state constitution and protect the rights of Connecticut people. And part of that is our right to keep more of our own earnings. It's really a philosophical question on who solves problems better. There are problems in society, but who solves them better? A government function or individuals who can come up with lots of different kinds of solutions. I always err on the side that we want society, people to solve problems because we do it best and we're the most accountable. To that end, I did put forward a bill to make sure that our tax brackets are indexed to inflation. I didn't realize inflation would become such a big issue, but that is really critical. I hope the next delegation really pushes for this. Connecticut has 7 tax brackets from 3% up to 6.99%. By example, or by comparison, Massachusetts has 1 tax bracket, a flat tax rate at 5%. So when inflation happens, those who are in lower brackets can creep up into a higher tax bracket. That does happen, and it does impact Connecticut residents. Otherwise, I've continued to oppose tax increases. We had a highway use tax that will impact consumer goods. We have a produced food tax that was instituted in the last 2 years that I was there. We had other taxes, dry cleaning sales tax, laundry sales tax, interior design sales. There was a whole bunch of services that are now included with sales tax that we opposed. Most recently, on the second biennium budget, Republicans put forward a tax cut, lower income tax cut for those who earn less than $175,000. So that, as a family of four, that would directly impact the example that was given for the 20% of Greenwich residents who are at Alice. Our desire was to have a structural, broad-based tax cut for low, middle-income folks, 1%. That did not go through in the budget. But those are the kinds of efforts that I myself and Republicans have been doing in our state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Meskers, if you could address the same question, please.
When you look at the role of government, you look at the role of the private sector in dealing with the issues of poverty and the issues of income inequality. It's a complicated story. Historically, in the United States, we've ended up in various epochs of taxation, government intervention, et cetera, from the time of the Great Depression. So where I would differ is there is a role for government. There's a role in taking care of our neediest. There's a role for the private sector as well, obviously, the nonprofits in taking care of our neediest. The problem we face today is income inequality is growing in the United States. It's a question of the lowest paid workers. It's a question of piecework, if you will, at an institutional level with chain stores, with franchisees, et cetera. It's a complicated issue. One of the issues we took forward was to vote to raise the minimum wage, was an attempt to lift people out of poverty. I think the idea that working wages need to have a differential between government aid and work and the sanctity of work and dignifying work, we have to look and make sure that wages are equitable or a living wage. The second piece of the equation is we enacted further tax reforms. When I was in, we accelerated the pension IRA or pension 401k tax exemptions for retirees. So we've increased that exemption. I believe it's 75 for the individual, 125 for dual income for tax exemptions. By 2026, 100% of that income will be exempt from taxes. Question will be, there's a fiscal cliff, so we'll have to look at that going forward, so that every dollar over the 75, every dollar over the 125 would bring you up to the full tax rate. Going forward, we paid down over $8 billion, or by the end of this year, we'll have paid down close to $9 billion for unfunded pension liabilities, which will provide the state with a savings of $880 million, which could be used either for tax cuts and or for aid like educational cost sharing that begins to deal with social inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio, the same question, please.
Issues of economic opportunity and economic mobility are probably the number one reason I chose to run for office in the first place, because as great a state as this is and as great a community as this is, there is enormous amounts of need all around this state, especially economically, and it's increased over time. Over the past 30 years, Connecticut's experienced the highest increase in poverty of any state in the country. That's not acceptable, I think, to any of our residents. So we need a change in direction in order to create opportunity and lift people out of poverty. The greatest anti-poverty program ever created was a full-time job. According to the U.S. Census, the poverty rate among people with a full-time job of any sort is 2%, and the overall poverty rate in this country is 12%. So you could reduce the poverty rate in this country by, 6 out of 7, 83%, if we create as many good jobs as possible in this state. So it's no surprise that Connecticut's seen such a large increase in poverty, because Connecticut has fewer jobs today than it did in 1999. That's unbelievable. That's unacceptable. We can do so much better in order to provide opportunity for people. So in my first term, I submitted over 20 pieces of legislation focused on economic issues to try to create economic opportunity, lift all boats, and reduce the cost of living, which really kills retirees, middle-class people, and working-class people. Most of all, it's regressive. So I think we need a broad-based middle class and working class tax cut in this state. 22 out of 43 states with personal income taxes in this country have permanently cut their middle class income tax rates since the beginning of the pandemic because of all the cash inflow that each and every state has gotten. Connecticut has not done that. We need to do that. We need to streamline regulations in order to reduce electricity and healthcare costs. I'll talk about that in subsequent answers. And we need to reduce barriers to work for working class people. We need to expand apprenticeships in the state, reduce the cap on apprenticeships. There shouldn't be a cap on apprenticeships. We should look at eliminating college degree requirements for some state jobs that don't actually need them, and we should cut licensing fees across the board, maximum $100 for licensed people. If you can do the job, if you're qualified, you should be able to.
Thank you so much. And since we're talking about wages, let's talk about something connected to that, which is affordable housing. And we know that there is a lack of affordable housing in Connecticut and here in Greenwich. Do you support the local Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the vision in the Affordable Housing Plan? How are you supporting partnerships to increase the stock of affordable housing? Let me start with you, Mr. Camillo.
Thank you. I do support that, and we've passed that. It was first proposed here in 1988, and we got it done last year with the RTM. But right now, there's no money in it, so it's still a work in progress. We have partnerships like with the Greenwich Communities, formerly Greenwich Housing Authority. We've had them around since the 1950s. It's a different model today. Back when my grandmother, Rose Camillo, was in Armstrong Court, it was a very different model. Today we're in the middle of refurbishing Armstrong Court. If you've been by there, it's beautiful. And that's whatever we have right now, we're working with them to make sure that they have our support to fix up what we have and really make them something that people living in those units can be proud of. But there's also a different model. There is now an integrated one approach where there's scattered site housing and it fits into the community. Where before, when I was growing up and spent many nights in Armstrong Court, people were lower income. Everybody was. But now the model is to mix everybody, right? You want to see people at all different socioeconomic levels. So in that, we're making progress. I do not support the mandates that the state puts on us. I think each town deals with them in their own way. They know their communities the best. I'm on the board of CCM, Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and we were successful in getting an opt-in, opt-out on one of these bills that they're going to suggest to the legislature in another month or so. And mainly the argument was that we support anything that New London wants to do for their community or Hamden, but support what we know, because we know we've been ahead of this, and surprisingly, we didn't have the votes going in, but we won it because people saw that Greenwich was doing the right thing.
Thank you so much. Mr. Arzeno, if you could talk a bit about what you envision or have planned ahead for the issue of affordable housing.
Thank you. Well, I mean, following what Fred is saying on the RTM, I spent significant time researching and listening to our local planning department and Greenwich communities on how to support local authority to solve issues around housing available in our community. Everything I witnessed confirmed that we need to provide tools like the Affordable Housing Trust, and I believe my work and relationship with local leaders will help me and my experience in Hartford to move these issues. We mentioned too at the Greenwich Realtors forum when we touched this subject, and I just mentioned 3 points to need. Number one, to start talking to one another in town and listening to everyone. I think there is improvement to be made between what the town and Greenwich communities are doing. Second, we need to strengthen the partnership with the Greenwich communities, as Fred said. That is a key. I mean, they have amazing projects. I had the opportunity while I was working for the Affordable Housing Trust to visit all the all the developments that they have done, and it's amazing. The projects and what had been done, I think that needs a better coordination between our town and them.
Thank you so much. Mr. Fazio, if you could talk to this as well, please.
This is a very important issue, and I think that we can advance our affordable housing goals in this community and in this state while protecting local control of our housing policy and planning and zoning. And that requires smart and targeted policies in order to accomplish that. One major concern is the fact that it costs like $600,000 per unit to develop a lot of this public affordable housing. If a contractor quoted you $600,000, the cost of building such a small unit, your jaw would drop. So we have to understand why it's costing so much to actually create affordable housing. That creates an enormous restriction on supply and the fiscal capacity of localities, including Greenwich, to build out affordable housing. We should also make sure that we have an all of the above type of affordable housing approach. It shouldn't just solely encourage one style of development, highly dense developments. There should also be towns should also be rewarded for encouraging and creating discrete forms of affordable housing all around town. So I submitted a bill that Representatives Aurora and Fiorello were also on in order to reform the 830G law that really restricts the ability of localities to make their own decisions to achieve affordable housing. We should count all forms of naturally occurring affordable housing. I think the way that would end up looking in practice is the towns would be able to show that there's affordable housing that's not deed restricted or not government housing, and then they would probably give tax abatements to the owners of those affordable housing units in order to encourage them to create more or to come forward and show that the town is actually creating that need. So I think there is a reasonable way forward, a targeted way forward of reform that promotes local control while also advancing our affordable housing goals in a sustainable manner with local buy-in.
Thank you so much. Well, if you haven't heard yet, Greenwich United Way is partnering with Greenwich Hospital to launch the community's first mental health and crisis intervention program designed for young people. Increased rates of child and adolescent mental health disorders require an urgent response. So tell us, please, what are you working on or what have you worked on to address the increase in mental health services? Mr. Aurora, let's begin with you.
Thank you. I'm going to borrow. Is it working? Yeah, no, it's better. Yeah, I'll borrow 30 seconds here to continue on on what we're discussing, which is 830G has to go. It just has to go. Because it is creating unnecessary conflict in our communities, and we cannot afford to fight with each other and argue with each other when there's such a pressing problem of affordable housing. And money needs to come in. If the state is serious, and we got three reps here who are going to carry the torch. If the state is serious about affordable housing, give Greenwich communities $50 million tomorrow morning from the ARP money or from the billions they have left. $50 million, and they will return it back too over the next 30 years. They'll return it back, not give, and we'll solve the problem. Just don't do this virtue signaling and I want to solve, but I won't do anything which is going to solve. So the problem is there, the solution is there, the problem is real, we got solutions, we're going to solve them. I'm going to spend the other 30 seconds here on mental health. We passed the most significant mental health bill in this session, and I'm very proud of it. It addresses all 5 elements of mental health, $100 million going towards access, towards insurance reform, and in 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes or even 2 hours, I couldn't get through that bill, which was debated by leaders across the aisle. Representative Pettit, who is a very thoughtful and good leader, a great leader, and Rep. Linehan was also on it, and I know all of us contributed to it. We wish we could do more, but we are 60. We're a minority, so we did what we could. But we did make tangible progress on mental health. It's a real issue. We're going to continue. I hope you're going to continue. All of us are going to continue on it, inside and outside the legislature. And I'm very proud of what has been done. Please look up the legislation or call me if you need more on that legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fiorello, if you want to follow with what you have done.
Sure, absolutely. Following COVID, mental health of our young people became just a most pressing issue across our states and of course in our community. This bill that Rep. Aurora is referencing, there were 3 major mental health bills that came before the session, 2 from the Senate, 1 from the House. I supported the bill from the House. All 3 of them were very comprehensive and covered similar issues. But some of the main points is we expanded mobile services, so it's fantastic that Greenwich and Greenwich United Way and the hospital are working together to have the services here, but other towns don't have that, so we advanced mobile services. We did allow more, there's a shortage of mental health professionals, so we changed, or rather loosened the way that folks can get in and be part of the help. For example, if you are a grad student and you have training, you can now get into the certified process much more easily. There's also online telehealth that became available that's going to help to make a difference. I guess there's 2 things I want to say as something for all of us to keep in mind is at the same time, we also allowed unlimited mental health sessions for minors without parental notification. So I really urge parents to be aware and continue to have conversations with your children because some of them may get mental health sessions without you knowing about it. And I think there is a correlation with children's mental health and the strength of the family. And, in any civil society, the parents have to be respected by the state laws as the primary decision makers. That should be the beginning point. And then, of course, we have a Department of Child Health Services to deal with children whose parents aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And just a second red flag is we really need to keep our children away from pot. That also has mental health implications. We did allow recreational marijuana in our state. So I hope our leaders coming in will certainly keep an eye on that too. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Khanna, if you could talk about your vision for bolstering mental health amongst our youth.
Thank you. I think we're facing a crisis when it comes to mental health, not just for children and adolescents, but also for adults. I've attended numerous legislative briefings in the past few weeks, and mental health is something that is affecting schools, hospitals, and other organizations in both Greenwich and Stamford, and it's imperative that we address this crisis. There was a lot of funding for mental health services in the last legislative session, and I think we need to make sure that the funding gets allocated to the right programs. I also think we need to keep advocating for funding for mental health. We need to staff emergency rooms with mental health professionals to address the needs of children and connect with community partners. And finally, we need to address the shortage of mental health staff, which is another area I would like to focus on, finding ways to incentivize young people to work in healthcare, and once they graduate, to stay in the state and to work by increasing the incentives and maybe loan forgiveness programs for aspiring nurses and mental health providers.
Thank you so much. Let's continue talking about our youth. Multiple studies and research has shown that the pandemic has increased the learning gap. What have you done or what will you do to help close this gap? Let's start with you, Mr. Camillo.
Thank you. I think that question probably would be best answered by somebody who's has something to do with the Board of Education or may have served on Education Committee. So I'll just give you a broad-based 30,000-foot view from my perspective. You do what you can, even if you're not directly involved or have authority over it. I mentioned the example before of partnering with the United Way when the pandemic hit to specifically target that population. When I was in the legislature, we had discussed, and I supported the universal pre-K notion. I think we voted on that too, I think. It's a long time ago, but it was expensive, and it wasn't a slam dunk because it was controversial and because of the money. But if you really think about it, and I've been involved with youth through teaching and coaching many years ago, a lot of these kids are born with, without the traditional two-parent family household, and we end up paying the price later on if they go astray. And so I think, while I'm not a big government person, and the government can't fix everything, in many cases it sometimes messes things up and needs to get out of the way. But here is a case where government is needed. And I think for those who, through no fault of their own, are born into a situation, we have to make sure that they get that education early on. And so whenever and wherever you can, whether it's through government programs or through the private sector, and we have a few here in the area that deliver those services, I think we have to support that, because that's something that it's the right thing to do for those children, but also going forward, it's the right thing to do for society.
Thank you so much. Mr. Meskers, talk to us about what you have worked on for early childhood education.
For the last 20 years, as I said, I was on the RTM. About 14 of those years, I was on the Education Committee, which more oversaw the local issues in terms of our budget, a review of the education process. So speaking to that, I think at the local level, we need to have a continued reinvestment effort in our school system, the physical structure, the infrastructure, the coursework. Supporting our educational system locally is fundamental. At the state level, one of the issues and the discrepancies, obviously, is that the educational system is supported in each of the municipalities by the local tax rate and by the real estate taxes, if you will. So what we've done at the state level is we've tried to do, in an educational cost-sharing formula, we've tried to assist those municipalities with financial constraints to add to their expenditures to support local education. So the first thing we've done is we've increased the reimbursement to the more disadvantaged communities to add to education. Second is we are beginning to look again. There's been this, as I think Fred mentioned earlier on, we've been looking at early childhood education and supporting, pre-K programs. Obviously, trying to close both the achievement gap and getting a head start is so important to do. Principally, the resources that we've saved in paying down our debt provide us with more resources to be able to aid to early childhood education, and it's fundamental.
Thank you so much. Ms. Khanna, if you could give us a forward-looking view of that.
Thank you. Greenwich is fortunate to have excellent public schools, and the Connecticut public school system is ranked 3rd in the nation by Education Week. And Greenwich schools got a score of A+ by Niche. That being said, we're not immune to the pressures facing public school education. Teachers are facing a burnout crisis and leaving the profession in droves. In a report released in November, the Connecticut Education Association found that 74% of Connecticut teachers they surveyed said they are more likely to leave the profession earlier than they planned, and the pool of available candidates is shrinking. Teachers are being asked to do more with less, and it's not tenable to ask teachers to work for less money than they could be making elsewhere, simply out of the goodness of their hearts. Teachers want to be treated with dignity, they want safe and comfortable working conditions, and they want to feel supported and also want to be paid sufficiently. While teacher pay and benefits are a local issue, what can be done at the state level is to make it easier to become a teacher. Only with qualified and committed teachers in the classroom can the pandemic learning gap be closed.
Could I add something too, because I served on education?
Please take 30 seconds. Absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want all of us to know that on state level education policy, a lot of that will come from the local Board of Ed, but at the state level, this education cost savings formula that Rep. Meskers just mentioned is probably one of the most complicated ways to fund education of any of the states in our country. It's like 11 tiers. It's very complicated. And Greenwich gets 0. So we don't get anything from state education funding. Our schools are funded locally. But we do have a state-level education issue. So for example, in New Haven, they have 42% chronic absenteeism. Our city schools are are suffering, and we do have to do something about that. It's sort of outside of our sphere here in Fairfield, but in the rest of the state, there is a great need for statewide education reform. And if you look across the country, education reform is happening in some very exciting ways, and I really hope that we can see some of that in Connecticut. Some of the bills I supported is like education scholarship funds, where corporations can support scholarship funds. These are all geared towards school choice so that the city parents have more than just their zip code schools. Charter schools, you know, the New York City has hundreds of charter schools, and across our whole state of 1,100 public schools, there are only 19 charter schools in the whole state. Please look into charter schools. They are public schools. We shouldn't see them as a threat to our district schools. We want a flourishing of education in our state. And I just wanted to share that with all of you and then with the incoming delegation. And serving on education was a great joy, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's switch gears a bit. Something dear to the Greenwich United Way. Connecticut's nonprofits need some help getting on the state's insurance plan, which would allow for significant savings on their part. Is there any legislation that you could develop or have worked on to support nonprofits in this manner? Mr. Fazio, let's start with you.
I don't know legislation that exists, and I'm happy to look into it. The Connecticut Partnership Plan, which is a state-run health plan that allows municipalities to buy in, is unfortunately in very, very bad fiscal straits. It's losing like $50 million a year. It's not even that big a plan. So it needs to be fixed and made fiscally sustainable. I think, alongside any efforts to expand it. Over the past 10 years or so, unfortunately, the funding supporting our state's nonprofits has fallen significantly, and we need to be in a strong fiscal state, an economic state here in Connecticut, in order to re-up that support for our nonprofits who do an amazing job, who hit far above their weight class. There is a study done in recent years that found that the state could actually save over $200 million a year by delegating a lot of the state's traditional responsibilities, especially around substance abuse help, mental health help, by delegating those responsibilities to our qualified nonprofits. That would also free up a lot of resources to reinvest even more in those areas. So we should look to our nonprofits to accomplish a lot of the jobs that the state needs to do a better job at. And so, I think that, and then finally, I would say we got to lower healthcare costs generally in the state. They go up 10% a year. They're higher than the national average. We could try to look at reforming the supply side of the healthcare industry in order to lower costs and improve competition, reform certificate of need laws. Other states that have tried to reform their certificate of need law system have seen a 6% decrease in healthcare costs, and also ensuring that there's more choice in health insurance programs. Connecticut has, I think, the highest level of state mandates in the health insurance sector of any in the country, which contributes to costs. So lowering healthcare costs generally, including for nonprofits, is also a possibility.
Thank you. Mr. Meskers, if you could talk to us from your perspective.
So I have the benefit of sitting on the insurance committee up in Hartford, and I've never seen a more intractable and difficult problem than healthcare and healthcare insurance. If you look at the state, if you look at the healthcare industry in the United States or the insurance industry, the three linchpins of costs are hospitals, insurance companies, and pharmaceutical companies. The drivers of healthcare costs are going up in the order of 7 to 9% a year across the board, not just in Connecticut. Connecticut does have a fair amount of mandates. Those mandates are particularly dealing with issues like mammograms, cost of insulin, et cetera. I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we passed a law on insulin. The law limited the cap on insulin costs to $45 for a dose of insulin, from $350 to $400. Now, I sat there and I supported that, but the interesting issue was that it didn't reduce the cost of insulin or the price that the pharmaceutical companies charged on insulin. What it did was it socialized the cost. Now, that socialization meant that your premiums went up because everyone who was a diabetic was getting their insulin at $45 a shot. That's part of what the role of any type of insurance is. It socialized some of the costs. So when you hear a mandate is a cost, it is. It's a cost when you look across the room to say, they should have insulin. They should have a mammogram. They shouldn't die of breast cancer. You make elective choices there on mandates, and it's complicated. In terms of the specific question, which is allowing the nonprofits into the plan, it was looked at in 2009. There is an ERISA tax issue on that would create an obstacle to allow them directly in. One of the potential solutions, and I'm not proposing because I have to go back and do the legislative research, would be to create a pool of nonprofits so that you could essentially collectivize the insurance bidding for a group of nonprofits, and a larger group would offer them an access to a lower cost insurance policy. The insurance companies won't like that because when they can price a 50-person or 25-person nonprofit, the premiums are higher because they can't measure the risk. When you price it for 1,000 people, you can do statistical analysis on the risk and get a lower cost. So there'll be a push-pull from the insurance industry about I'm taking away some of their profit motive, forcing them to bid on larger contracts, and I'll have to look at the tax and drivers on that as to whether or not that's able. But I think creating a pool of risk for nonprofits would be one. State assistance in that pool of risk would be the other way to try to lower those costs. And I think those are the logical solutions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Arzeno, if you could be forward-thinking on this for us, what is your best approach?
Thank you. We are really being hit hard by raising costs of healthcare premiums and prescriptions. I believe we are seeing something along the lines of 7 to 10% increase in cost per year. Year to year, it is outpacing salary increases, and I think this will translate to added pressure because this isn't isolated to Connecticut, it is a national issue. Nationally, Americans are paying double and triple the cost of other developed nations, and the Affordable Care Act was a step forward with regulations that, as a father, I am grateful for, like mandating plans to allow inclusion of children longer as they transition to adulthood. Thinking about our nonprofits who are really doing the service work to fill in gaps and reach, for the most part, marginalized or underserved populations, families impacted by a crisis in one way or another, we know this has to be impacting your bottom line, and you are working miracles on razor-thin budgets already. So the way I'm hoping to approach it as a fresh set of eyes with my financial background and experience on the Labor Contracts Committee and the RTM, where we work with state insurance as a user group, like you, would be, I will be analyzing that approach so we can address this within the existing state programs that will help the nonprofit community through a collective group plan or subsidize accessible purchase to the federal exchange.
Thank you so much.
Let me just say, can I add to this conversation here?
Take 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
We'll hold you to it.
Yes. First is that, this gives you a glimpse of the discussions we have up in Hartford. Rep. Meskers clearly pointed out the problem clearly, that we did not reduce price of insulin, we socialized it. Well, there was a proposal to do so, which is allow import of insulin from Canada. Well, what happened there? Well, everybody backed off because the pharma companies really pushed back on the committee. That's it. That didn't come out. So we got to solve problems, not push them, not socialize them. And that's really a challenge. Reducing healthcare cost is the way, which is what Senator Fazio pointed out. Shifting it from one part of her demographic to another, from nonprofits to the middle class, to the rich, to the poor, to this, does not work.
Thank you so much.
We have to reduce healthcare costs.
Thank you so much. I have a specific question for Mr. Camillo. We want to be respectful of your time. We know you need to go. If you can give us a quick update, please, on the future of Nathaniel Witherell.
Thank you, and I hope to come back. I have an appointment at 9:30 that was made in April, but I'll be right back. Nathaniel Witherall's become our most controversial department because there's an issue about whether or not we should actually be in that business. I put out an RFP last year just to see if there's another model that would help us deliver care better and not drain the taxpayers. So as somebody who has had lots of relatives in there, who has volunteered there, who has supported the mission of it, and who is very proud of Nathaniel Witherall for taking care of its own, all of us, you still can't put your head in the sand, right? It's the last, doing some digging, we found out in the last 9 years alone, we subsidized it with $43 million. That's just in 9 years. And there's other issues that come with that, being a town department, grievances, lawsuits, threats of lawsuits. And there's a reason no towns do this, right? There's a reason why we don't have a hospital, right? Towns usually don't do this, but we're kind of proud that we've done it all these years. And my hope is that we make a decision. The town attorney has said that this decision has to be made by the board of Nathaniel Witherall ultimately, but it would have, if we did go to another model, there'd be a sequence of 4 approvals: RTM, Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning, and of course the Nathaniel Witherall Board. My goal is to get them that information to make a wise decision, because if there's a better way to deliver care and to do so that doesn't cost, between $5 and $6 million a year in subsidies, money that could be going to other things, including seniors and people that are, having disability issues and or schools or whatever. That money, it's a lot of money. So John Mastronardi, who took over 2 years ago, has done a great job at getting some of the low-hanging fruit out of, and making it run more efficiently, but there's still issues with it. And there's always been issues. Even when it was a 5-star facility, there was issues with it. So while we're proud of it and we want, part of me personally would love to see it stay the way it is, but I also face reality. And I know that you have to make the right decision for the people, even if it's a tough one, even if there's people that are going to be mad at you. And my goal, again, is to get that information, all the pertinent information, over to the board of Nathaniel Witherall. We're doing our due diligence now on the companies that responded to the RFP, some really good ones, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you so much.
I'll be right back.
Hope to see you back. Staying on the issue of our seniors, we want to talk about what you will do to help older adults and disabled individuals access other forms of transportation beyond public transportation. Mr. Camillo obviously could talk to us on a more local level, but from a state level, if you could, Ms. Fiorello, talk to us about what you have seen in Harvard.
On this topic, I did support a law that would have helped bring up our state laws on service animals to match the federal level. And part of that would have been to ensure that your service animal is allowed to go on, had a right of way on like Ubers and Lyfts. That was part of that bill. It's such a specific law, but such a specific question. I do want to assure people that we have very good non-emergency transportation programs in our state. At the state level, it is a well-funded program right now. Maybe Alan disagrees. I don't know what specifically is at the local level, but on the state, it's a non-emergency transport program. I hope Rachel can do more on that specific need, Alan. Don't really have more to say on that topic, sorry.
Thank you. And Ms. Khanna, if you could give us your take.
Yes, thank you. Since the start of COVID, bus ridership has been made free in Connecticut using federal pandemic funds, and the recent legislative special session extended free bus fare to the spring of 2023. This service has been very popular, and ridership levels are close to pre-pandemic levels. With the state surplus, I think it is worth considering whether to make free or reduced bus fare continue past the spring. And at the local level, the Transportation Association of Greenwich, their dial-a-ride service has been a lifeline for seniors and disabled individuals before and during COVID, and I hope the town will continue to fund TAG at a level where it can continue to serve these constituents.
I can add on that bus service, we did put $10 million to the free bus service. That's all state and transit run buses are free at the moment. There is demands now that the bus services be free permanently. How that's going to be funded is certainly something that all of us should look into and understand.
Thank you. Let's talk about the season, right? We're heading into winter. The new standard service supply rates are approximately doubling. This means the total residential electric rates for Connecticut utilities will be increasing by approximately 40% above rates currently in effect and above last winter. Once approved, the new rates will go into effect January 1, 2023, just a few weeks away, through the first 6 months of the year. How are you working to keep costs lower and ensure Connecticut residents are getting the assistance they need to pay for their bills? Let's start with you, Mr. Meskers.
Probably one of the biggest or most complicated issues I've faced since joining the legislature on the energy and technology bill has been the cost of energy in the state of Connecticut. Two of the constraints that we suffer in Connecticut is we're at the end of the pipelines. There's been an unwillingness to expand or increase the supply of natural gas. So at peak points in the season, particularly in the winter season, there's a constraint that drives up the price of natural gas. Now that's affecting the generators within the state, but the transmission lines are across the country, and the generation isn't necessarily solely in the state of Connecticut. That being said, New England suffers higher energy prices. The first thing that I've done or have worked on in the past is in the deregulated environment post-Enron, there were transmission companies, generating companies, there were third-party suppliers. In our energy assistance market, the third-party energy suppliers were essentially booking residents who were getting state aid, and in every rollover period, they were raising the rates to a 30, 40, or 50% premium to what the official 6-month policies from Eversource were. So I barred them from that market because we found that the overcharges were over $7 million a year. So they've been banned from the energy assistance market so that we can get a more effective rate for our policyholders. I'm looking at the overall market, which has the same problem, and the order there of magnitude is somewhere between 35 or 40 million of energy surcharges from the third-party energy suppliers. They're not providing a valuable service to the state. In terms of long-term structural issues, transmission lines from Hydro-Quebec, if we can get them through Massachusetts and New Hampshire, would be very important to lower energy costs. But the structural issues right now, the best we can do is energy assistance to our consumers and try to reform the market. And the reforms are beginning to move, but we need a lot more reforms to reduce the misdeployment of capital from our electric distribution companies so we get an effective investment in our infrastructure. We're basically paying on the infrastructure side, as I like to say, it's in simple terms, we're paying for a Cadillac and we're getting a Yugo in terms of the quality of the infrastructure. And that means we need to reform the capital. It's that's a simple conceptual. Getting there is going to be a lion's fight. It's going to be very difficult, but we've got to reform the energy system.
Thank you. And Mr. Fazio, from your perspective, we'll give you the final word this morning.
Oh, perfect. So I can say whatever I want.
Maybe, if they let you.
Unless I ask for 30 seconds.
I'll fight you for it. So the rise in energy costs this winter is a disaster, but Connecticut's electricity grid's been far too expensive for far too long. Connecticut has the 3rd highest electricity rates in the country after New Hampshire and Hawaii. And we have high natural gas costs, yes, but our natural gas costs are not among the 3 highest in the country. Rhode Island's further down the natural gas pipeline, but they their ratepayers pay hundreds of dollars less per year for their electricity bills. So there's also other underlying problems that make Connecticut's grid more costly. We need to focus on long-term reform that bends the cost curve down for everybody. We can't just put money from one pocket into the other. The legislation that was passed in the special session by our legislature last week will provide some short-term aid, including low-income heating assistance, but we need long-term solutions because that's only a short-term fix at best. We should roll back or eliminate the state-imposed policy charges on ratepayers. Embedded in your electricity bill, whether you know it or not, is about 3 or 4 cents per kilowatt hour of state-imposed policy charges. That amounts to over $260 per year for the average household in Connecticut. We should streamline and simplify our renewable portfolio standard, bring in all forms of clean energy to the renewable portfolio standard, including all hydroelectric, all nuclear, et cetera, which is zero carbon and more affordable and reliable. And we should simplify that system. There's 3 different tiers of classes of renewables in the renewable portfolio standard. It should just be one. We need to give PURA the authority looking after ratepayers more authority within our state government in order to protect us from the EDCs, from the utilities, and we need to build out the infrastructure. That's non-negotiable. We have to do that in the long term for the sake of keeping the lights on. I mean, it's not just going to be a matter of cost. It's going to be a matter of reliability. We need to get the natural gas pipelines built out from the west. We need to get the transmission lines built out from the north. We have to focus on long-term solutions. Connecticut hasn't done that thus far. It can do it in the future.
Okay, fine, 20 seconds, really.
Thank you. So, even though we are in opposing political parties, and he is a senator and I'm only a lowly rep, I don't have any major criticism, except I think you said New Hampshire instead of Alaska.
No, it's not. Alaska.
It isn't? I thought it was Alaska and Hawaii.
It's not.
Okay, I'll defer then. So, that's good, I'm impressed. I think the only issue on the renewables or on the state mandates is they reflect our social policy in terms of solar, energy installation assistance. So I don't think they should be in the electric bill because that's a very regressive tax. I would like to see us move those energy charges into the general fund so that the individual taxpayer is paying out of their tax revenue. It's a more progressive way to do it, and we reduced energy costs, which I think would be a much better way to do that. So that would be the only major difference, and I stand corrected on New Hampshire.
I'm sorry, I have to say this. The actual price right now is the energy is deregulated, and it's not a 50% increase. That is if you do not shop for electricity. Today, I ask all of you to try out energizect.com, and your price increase will be only 10%, not 50%. And I don't know why everybody doesn't know that, and everybody will end up paying this higher amount. And I've explained this to several folks, and everybody has kind of tried it out. It is a 3-year contract, which is at 16 cents right now, which saves you most likely $150 a month. And people will say, well, I don't want to lock in for 3 years. But it's the law which we passed makes the cancellation charges 0. So in 6 months, if your prices go down, you can cancel that contract. So the big thing which I really encourage all nonprofits to, and all of us to spread the word, is please shop for your electricity, because then you will not pay 50% more and you will only pay 5% more. Ken, if you're listening, please publish this. Really, because there's a 1.2 billion.
We will leave it there. We do appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Greenwich United Way, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our state, to your constituents, and for the respectful conversation this morning. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.